Hello, my name is Sandra Schaefer, and I'm going to be taking you through question S5-13 on this video tutorial. This question can be found on page 157 of your workbook, or it can also be found in the study plan on Pearson MyLab under chapter section 5.4. This question is dealing with creating a multi-step income statement for a company called Northern Telecommunications. They use a perpetual inventory system, and they have given a list of accounts and balances here in the figures section. They're asking you to complete a multi-step income statement for the year ended August 31st, 2020. So there are a few different steps in filling out a multi-step income statement. I like to think of it in sections. First section is always the title and filling out the 3 lines of the title of the statement. For any kind of financial statement, the first line is always the name of the company. The second line is the name of the statement that you're completing, in this case, the income statement. And the third line is either a date, in the case of a balance sheet or a trial balance, or it's a date range in the case of a statement of owner's equity or an income statement. And a little bit of a hint, if it's a date range, it usually tells you that in the question. So you can see here it says for the year ended August 31st. The next step to filling out a multi-step income statement is to look for all of the accounts and create the gross margin section. In the gross margin section, you have all of your sales accounts listed, less your cost of goods sold equals your gross margin. So when you're creating your first line of your income statement, you're looking for all of your sales accounts. Here we only have one sales account given, net sales revenue, and it's $64,000. So that will be the first line of our income statement. Now, some questions, they will actually give you sales revenue, sales returns and allowances, sales discounts, and you have to calculate net sales revenue. That's simply just by taking sales revenue, subtracting any discounts, subtracting returns and allowances to then get net sales revenue. This is a simple question. They've given you net sales revenue. The next section in gross margin is cost of goods sold. So we're going to put cost of goods sold, and we're going to put in the amount that they give you, which is $46,000. And the next step is to calculate your gross margin. On a multi-step income statement, you need to know how to do the calculations for each of the sections. So you have to know that you take your net sales revenue and you subtract $46,000 in order to get your gross margin of $18,000. The next section of a multi-step income statement is filling out the operating income section. Operating income section is where you list all of your operating expenses, and then you subtract all of your operating expenses from your gross margin to get your operating income. Now, this looks like a fairly short multi-step income statement, and sure enough, when I go and look through the list of accounts, they simply give one account for operating expenses. Sometimes they'll list all the individual accounts, and you have to figure out your section of selling expenses, your section for administrative expenses, which would total your operating expenses. But this is a fairly simple income statement, so it's just total operating expenses. We put the amount of $19,000 in, and then we can calculate our operating income by subtracting your expenses from your gross margin. Now, in this case, we have a negative number. The fourth step, typically in a multi-step income statement, is you would then calculate your other revenue and expenses and add that section in. In here, we don't have any other revenue and expense accounts, so there is no other revenue and expenses section in this multi-step income statement. In this case, when we don't have a revenue and other revenue and expenses section, then your operating income is actually equal to your net income. In this case, because we have expenses that are greater than our gross margin, we have a negative $1,000, which is a net loss situation. And that is how you fill out a multi-step income statement.